Thobela, Dumelang, Sanbonani, Avsheni, and welcome to See Youth powered by Celsi. This is our very first podcast, and this podcast is really for you, the youth, because we hear you and we see you, and it's so imperative for us to have conversations that matter, that affect you, and those conversations that you can contribute and form part of. This See Youth in Conversation is really going to discuss GBV and abuse because we have started 16 days of activism against women and children abuse, or if you'd like to call it 16 days of activism against gender-based violence and abuse. So today it is myself, Letabo Kholane. I am the PR manager at CELC, joined by my colleagues whom they will introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Shane Govender.
That's all.
What do you want me to say? You didn't tell me what to tell.
Hi, but you didn't introduce yourself.
Do I say I'm from marketing to the max?
Yeah.
I didn't even. Hey? Hi. Okay, let me go. How's that, right? So that at least you know you've cut it.
We've already started, bruh.
Okay. Hi, I'm Shane Govender from Marketing to the Max.
Hi, I'm Kavya Swaminathan. I'm from the TS Foundation.
Yes. So Kavya is from the TS Foundation. She is our expert today who's going to help us unpack some of the topics that we're discussing today. We're going to be tackling abuse and gender-based violence because we really need to understand what is gender-based violence and what is abuse and the different types of abuse that exist there, because as people, we can only assume. I'm not even sure we know what gender-based violence is. So
There's so many forms.
exactly.
And we just don't know all of them.
Yes. And we don't even know the signs of all of them.
Correct.
Yeah. So let's start with unpacking abuse and gender-based violence. Because when you think abuse and gender-based violence, you often think physical abuse. But there's so many different types. But let's start with what is gender-based violence and abuse?
Okay, so gender-based violence is abuse perpetrated against someone because of their gender. So statistics and trends show us that it's mainly females that are the victims. They're the ones that have violence perpetrated against them. But men can also be victims of gender-based violence. So please don't forget men in the conversation.
That's why you're here, Shane, to represent them.
No, I agree. I mean, and what's interesting about what you said is whenever it's referred to, and it has been referred to, especially in the past, it's mostly amongst the women are the victims. But what I'm finding is that more and more, I mean, liberation is a great thing. Well,
Yes.
let's not get it wrong. But the fact is, because of liberation, you're finding that when somebody grows as a female, then the impressions of what happens when men do it is exactly what's happening on the other side. So more men as well are starting to experience the abuse, whether it's emotional, physical in some cases as well, financial, especially if she earns a lot more than he does now, that sort of thing. So it's starting to even, that's the scary part, right? It's starting to even where on both sides of the scale we're having that. So abuse is abuse. It's wrong. That's the bottom line.
Yeah. So now, what is domestic violence? Because then some people go and report cases of abuse and gender-based violence, and then they get turned away because they say, no, it's a domestic issue. And then we hear the term domestic violence. What is that in relation to GBV and abuse?
GBV, like I said, is violence perpetrated because of your gender, right? So that could be a woman walking down the street who gets catcalled. That's a form of gender-based violence. Sexual assault is also what we think about, or a man beating his wife because it's his wife. That's where the line between like gender-based violence and domestic violence are interchangeable. So domestic violence is violence within the home, within the family. So that can be a brother abusing a brother, or a husband and a wife, a dispute between a father and a child, or a mom and a kid. So it's violence within the household. And domestic violence, we have a very comprehensive Domestic Violence Act in South Africa, actually. It covers a whole bunch of stuff, which is also stuff we're going to touch upon later, so I'm not going to go into detail now. But it includes physical violence, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, financial abuse, stalking, or like online harassment also fall under within the Domestic Violence Act. So like I said, we have a very comprehensive Domestic Violence Act, and GBV forms and informs part of it.
So I think we're really uneducated actually in terms of abuse, domestic violence, because now when you think abuse and domestic violence, you think in a relationship context. So either a man and a wife, or girlfriend, boyfriend, girlfriend, girlfriend, boyfriend, boyfriend. You know, you always think about it in a relationship context and not in other types of environments. You know, like you've just described, that there's abuse between family, siblings. There's abuse between friends as well, colleagues.
Yeah.
You know, and the fact that me getting catcalled is a form of gender-based violence. Okay.
And bullying, where does that fit in?
Bullying, so if you want it to be gender-based violence, a bullying would be schoolboys or men are bullying a woman because she's a woman. You often see that in the workplace, for example. So like if you have a woman in like a high corporate job that is mainly filled with men in the infrastructure, there will be types of bullying that you will face. That's when you consider bullying like a gender-based violence issue. In the domestic violence sphere, you'd see it like, you generally see it between siblings. But it's also difficult because, like, say if it's happening at school, you have to see why the bullying is taking place. Is it peer pressure? Is it drugs? Is it the sphere? So it's always the context that informs where it falls under.
But it's for me, what it is, it's a starting point.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a situation. I sit on board for one of the schools, so I get this info. There's a little girl in like grade 5 that's brilliant at dancing, but she gets bullied by all the other girls because they can't dance like her. And she's always doing all the shows and stuff, and then they pick on her. So it's bullying.
Yeah.
But it can escalate into violence.
Yes. So the thing about when we talk about like domestic violence and gender-based violence, it's like I said, it's the context where it's used. So bullying is a part of that.
Yeah.
So gender-based violence and domestic violence, they're like big umbrellas, and then how it happens, it would be the bullying then. So like bullying, teasing, verbal abuse, harassment, like demeaning remarks and stuff, that all fall under that thing. Yeah.
So our partnership on this GBV campaign is obviously with the TS Foundation, but also the Warrior Project. So one of the points that Yvonne, who leads the Warrior Project, that she made in terms of understanding what is abuse in GBV is damage to property or entry into property without consent. As a form of abuse, you know, and you don't realize or you don't think about it in that context, you know, that can also be abuse. So please don't go breaking people's things, because guys, you'll get arrested, you know, because that is abuse, you know, and don't be entering people's houses without keys, because that's also a form of abuse, particularly if consent hasn't been given, you know. But now, entry into a property without consent and as a form of abuse in the context of, let's say, crime, because we know that people enter people's places without any consent, and then they go and take people's things without consent. How do you draw the line?
So I think that's where when we talk about relationships, so when like a police will listen to a statement, when it's domestic violence when you have an ex-partner, an estranged family member, when you have that relationship to a person. It's home invasion when it's strangers. So I think that's how it's defined and how the police see it. So I think the vital part about domestic violence and gender-based, less so with gender-based violence, is the relationship between the people involved. And I think the relationship's also what makes it more complicated and intricate.
Because I think that's important to get across, because then you don't want people now assuming that home invasion and abuse because someone has entered their home is the same thing, you know, and going to report it incorrectly, because you're going to go, someone has come into your house or into your property without your consent. Maybe you do know who it is, and you go and say, my house was broken into, and you don't explain the relationship. So then I think it's quite key and critical that we educate ourselves in terms of the differences, you know, when it comes to these kind of situations, because you go and report something incorrect.
Yeah. And I think when it comes to reporting, that reporting step is so vital, because that first statement that you give is so important because that's what the entire investigation hinges on. And we always tell clients that who come to us, when you go report, yes, this police officer will take a statement, but you're well within your rights to say, can I write it out? You're watching me write it out as I narrate it. Because when you narrate your story to someone, they will summarize when they write. They're not going to write it word for word.
Yeah.
And a lot of stuff gets lost in translation. The intricate details are lost. Yes, yes. The intricate details are lost. So you are well within your rights, like I said, to write your statements, and then you can get it stamped. The oath, the commissioner of oaths and stuff will be there, because that's what's important.
Yes.
And that also helps police officers define what it needs to be. Yeah.
So now, one of the other points that Yvonne made was intimidation and harassment. So how do we define intimidation and harassment, and when does it become a form of abuse?
So I think how we say intimidation is a show of force, right? It's playing on that fear. The fact I'm bigger than you, I have something over you, I can do something to you. I think when we say harassment, there's more of a pattern. At least that's how we understand it.
And then the harassment, does it also include online harassment? Because I mean, now we're in the digital age, and people will harass you online, you know. How do you define that as a part of a pattern for abuse?
I think it circles back to what you said about consent. And I think consent and boundaries. When people are breaching on your consent and your boundaries that you've created, like, yes, we have like the block function or stuff like that, but like a sign would be like, I unfriended this person, I've blocked this person, but they are creating different accounts to keep on targeting me. So that would be one thing. Yeah,
I think it's a growing concern. I mean, I know there's a lady that I followed who's pretty good with that stuff. I mean, with the certain instances you had celebrities had that same kind of concern. When you said something in the public space, you can't take it back. As long as there's 3 people and more, you're in trouble. And I think when you say, you know, you can block and all of that, I mean, I think most people have been victims to these things. I personally remember that people used to call me and not talk, private number calls. It's not just on social media. It's different ways. And it's when the relationship in certain instances breaks down, or it's like usually a partner that you left, you know, that sort of thing. You find those things happening. That abuse itself becomes a huge concern, because it starts off like that, you don't know, then you start getting paranoid.
it's the emotional toll it takes on you.
It's because now you don't know if the person's doing WhatsApp, so you block them on WhatsApp. And there's phone calls from private numbers, and you can't block a private number, so you don't know what to do. And then I know the authorities can't do anything.
Yes. And I think that's one of the most frustrating things when it comes to like in stalking cases and cybercrime thing, is that until someone physically does something to you, there is a very little that the police can do. So you have a stalker who, even if they're standing across the street from you, you can get them from loitering, like for loitering charges or whatever, but they can come back. Or worse, there's someone in your community. They're standing in front of their house that just happens to be in front of your house, but they're looking at you all the time. You go to the police and the police will say, but what did he do? What did they do? So that's where there's a very fine line. And I think that's important that we have these conversations. It's because we need to know how to address this. And when it comes to cyber crimes, the difficulty becomes is that the internet and our systems are constantly evolving. So now we can talk about like abuse on Twitter or on TikTok or on like YouTube comments and stuff. But like 10 years ago, that wasn't a thing. So, and legislation takes time and procedure takes time. So it's very difficult to place that in an infrastructure that's constantly changing. So I think being flexible in our definitions and constantly widening it is also very important.
But it also depends on the day. I find if you look at TikTok lives, right, as an example, some of the lives are extremely verbally abusing. They're abusive. That's the bottom line, whoever's on it. But then the same kind of conversation happens in another one. It's not abusive because of the context of it. But people are accepting of it, even though the guys or the girls might swear and tell their story, but it's not as if it's something that's taken as abusive. But in the other one swears at the person. And I think that is the context.
the community of online that really takes it off. Because if, so like you said, you're doing a TikTok live and you have 20 people calling you names, I can't go hunt every single 20 of those persons. And then it's a feed, right? So you see it and then it's gone. And are you putting yourself through secondary trauma of going back, finding the comment to report this out? Person, like, it makes sense, like, on a psychological level. It's completely understandable that you're just like out of sight, out of mind about it. But the thing is that you still saw it, and that's still going to affect you. Like, you'll go to bed at night being like, I saw those 20. And people are not subtle when they're offensive. Yes, it's full caps. Like, they want you to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Geez, people are so mean. Like, I mean, they and that's the thing. People are not always careful with the words that they say and how we speak to each other, because we suddenly think it's okay to treat each other badly, which then brings me to unpacking emotional, mental, and verbal abuse. Because often when we think about abuse, we think physical abuse because you can see the bruises, you know, but we don't think about other types of abuses. And there's emotional, there's verbal, there's mental, there's financial, there's sexual, and the list goes on.